Now, since Israel's genocidal campaign against Gaza began many months ago, there has been an attempt to turn, I suppose, scrutiny onto those who oppose the genocide rather than those who support and cheerlead this genocidal onslaught. The real dangerous, hateful extremists are the people who oppose mass murder. That's essentially what the British establishment has tried to do. And there's no better example than what we're going to talk about today, which is a proposal by, we'll talk about it, from on high, I would say, to ban Palestine Action. Palestine Action is a brilliant group who have done direct action in this great tradition of peaceful civil disobedience, which won many of the rights and freedoms people take for granted today, exposing, for example, firms linked to Israel's not just current genocidal onslaught, but the ongoing oppression of the Palestinian people, the deprivation of their right to national self-determination, apartheid, colonization, we could go on. So firstly, it's great to speak to you, Huda Ammori from Palestine Action. Lovely to see you. How you doing?
Good. All right. Glad to be here.
It's a big honor. Right. I'm just going to do a little preamble now to get everyone up to date on what's going on, because then we can talk about this properly with you. So basically, what we're talking about is there's a guy, a bloke called John Woodcock, who is now called Lord Walney. Now, he is the government's so-called independent advisor on political violence, and he has a report coming out next week. And that report is pushing for far-reaching attacks on basic democratic freedoms and rights, including suggesting banning Palestine Action. Now, who is this guy? Let's just be clear who he is. So he used to be a Labour MP, and he was on the very right of the Labour Party. He was chair of Labour Friends of Israel. He resigned from the Labour Party in 2018 after an investigation into claims he'd sent inappropriate text messages to a female aide, which, to be clear, he denies. The next year, he called on voters to back Boris Johnson's Conservative Party. Johnson was clearly delighted and then appointed him the next year as a life peer in the House of Lords, hence Lord Walney. He was then made the government's so-called independent advisor on political violence and disruption. As somebody who's been on the receiving end of far-right violence, including being beaten up by a neo-Nazi, interesting. What's he focusing on? Oh, let's have a look, shall we? Although he's supposedly looking at activity in what was described as the far-right, far-left, interesting how he uses that term and what that actually means. And other political groups, he told the right-wing Telegraph newspaper he was focusing on so-called progressive extremism, including activities related to the climate emergency and racial injustice. Now, in recent months, he's been trailing several recommendations of his big detailed report, which will be released, on what he thinks the government should be doing. And that includes a form of prescription on groups that regularly break the law in the, by the way, very long, it's not just British specific, but it is a British tradition as well as a tradition elsewhere of civil disobedience, which would, obviously was used to demonize and attack the likes of the suffragettes, trade unionists, you could go on. Now, among 30 recommendations, it proposes bans on at least two protest groups, Just Stop Oil and Palestine Action, which acts against arms companies which supply Israel's military. But it's just emerged that he had lobbying links to companies that would benefit from these attacks and protesting. And there's a Guardian article by my colleague which goes into this, Damien Gale, and it points out he has entries in his Lord's Register of Interest. So when you are a MP or a Lord, you have a register of interest which details your business interests. And that's important because then voters are able to scrutinise the decisions made by MPs and cross-check them against the business interests that they're involved in and see if there's a conflict of interest as voters and citizens would see it. So that includes acting as chair of the Purpose Business Coalition, an organisation run by the PR and lobbying firm Crown Associates, which counts the oil company BP and arms company Leonardo among its clients. I'm reading from The Guardian here. The register also shows he's a paid advisor to Rudd Peterson Public Affairs, another lobbying firm which acts for Glencore, a Swiss mining company with interest in coal, and Emwell Energy, which describes itself as highly focused on oil and gas business. These are relevant, obviously, in terms of we're looking as well at the proposed bans, including Just Stop Oil. Now, Leonardo, in particular, has been subject to a persistent campaign of protest by Palestine Action, The Guardian notes, including occupations of its factories during which equipment was smashed and graffitiing of the entrance to its London HQ. Now, before I speak to Huda, I'm just going to have a little clip here from the podcast The News Agents, where Lord Walney, was actually interrogated about this. It's quite interesting. It's quite rare to see something like this happen on any mainstream outlet. So let's just have a quick look.
John, can I just ask you whether you're the right person to be advancing these arguments, given that you're a former chair of Labour Friends of Israel and Palestine Action, and I'm just going to quote them here, and I would like to hear your response. They say you're the current chair of the Defence Purpose Coalition, and you're getting funding from the Israel lobby.
Yeah, I think when any organisation starts talking about an Israel lobby, they need to look at their own slide into anti-Semitism. That is a textbook example of the kind of anti-Semitism that mainstream organisations have tried to move away from in recent years.
John, I mean, you are the former chair of Labour Friends of Israel. Do you not see how this is going to come across to supporters of Palestinian liberation?
Well, I mean, I don't think I would go into this thinking I was going to make friends with people who were part of that extreme end of the pro-Palestine movement anyway. But I think the public and lawmakers are going to have to look at this report in the round. It's a big report. It's 100,000 words. It's got a lot of. It's got a lot of.
Talk us through this. What is the Defence Purpose Coalition? We've been honestly scratching our heads and calling around trying to work out what the Defence Purpose Coalition is or does. You're the current chair of that as well.
The Purpose Coalition is an organisation of purpose-led groups, including has been some defence-related companies who value the contribution that they make to the UK economy, and we should all do that.
But the point you make about that, look, you are an impartial voice on this. I just think that the perception would be that people would beg to differ, given you kind of have a role with the defence industry. You have been a part of Labour Friends of Israel. I
also just want to show a little clip of Palestine Action doing their thing. Let's have a little look. All right, you've had to listen to me spiel on for quite a long time. Let's just start then. So you've got this. Let's just talk about the facts shall we, with say Labour Friends of Israel. So Lord Walney's gone to Israel on trips paid by Labour Friends of Israel. So in 2011, he also in 2011 attended the 10th anniversary of the British Israel Communications and Research Centre, BICOM, which is the main pro-Israel lobbying group in Britain. 2011, 2013, he was chair of Labour Friends of Israel. 2018, he went to Israel, paid for the Australia-Israel Cultural Exchange Limited. 2024, again, went to Israel, paid by the European Leadership Network, which was created in 2007 to counter the widespread criticism of Israel in Europe. Should we just start with this facet? What do we think that tells us?
Well, I think the first thing it tells us is that he's not very independent. We're being told that this guy is supposed to be an independent government advisor who's trying to claim to be impartial and to have applied the response he gave to the Guardian article was that he was applying an objective standard to his fact-finding mission for the past 3 years, or so he says. But clearly he has got huge leanings towards Israel. He's massively influenced by it. So this is not an impartial report. And this is a report that's designed in order to try and recommend things that will be made into British law. So you have to look at the origins and the motivations behind why he would want to write something like this. And if he's getting paid, he's going on trips funded by the Israel lobby. Just a few months ago in January, during the middle of a genocide, in what he called a solidarity mission with a genocidal entity, whilst people in Gaza are being massacred and still are to this day. He's getting paid by arms companies through these firms, Leonardo, who supply arms to Israel. And we're supposed to believe that that's not going to impact his thinking or his motivations. And when we can see what's coming out in this report and what he's recommending, that we should be banned, and we're 7 months into the Gaza genocide, it shows where is the priority of this government, or this supposed independent government advisor People have been calling for an arms embargo. The British people have shown, through polls that they want an arms embargo on Israel. But rather than entertain that, they're talking about banning us, Palestine Action, who've been taking direct action to actually impose somewhat of a people-powered arms embargo, where we shut down the weapons companies arming Israel when our government fails to do so, because we're not going to sit by and allow a genocide to happen. I mean, this man has no integrity, and anyone who takes this seriously, I just think it's a sham. It's a sham on democracy. It's a sham to the British public that people should have to buy this stuff up, have to entertain a report in Parliament, take it seriously when the motivations are so clearly warped towards a direction, towards a genocidal entity. And I also say, like, the way that he's gone about this, right? So in October, and he's constantly been tweeting Palestine Action, like constantly. And, you just think he's another Zionist bot by the way that he just keeps tweeting it on Palestine Action. And in October, he tweeted an article from The Sun about us and said that it called us Hamas's little helpers. Now, this is a senior independent government advisor who's writing a report, who's supposedly applying an objective standard. And this is 8 months ago, he's calling us Hamas's little helpers. He already knows what he wants out of the report and where he's leaning towards. So, I just think it's a bit of a joke. But the problem is it's a joke, but it's actually being taken seriously by the establishment and the state.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I'm sure Lord Walney would go, well, my business interests have nothing to do with what I'm doing. But if it was something he opposed and someone was linked to businesses in a similar way, what would he say? I mean, it's just, I would love to hear his defense there. But I think that other part just is interesting. He's tried to jump on Israel lobby and to conflate that with anti-Semitism. We've seen, obviously, repeated attempts to conflate critiques of the Israeli state and its cheerleaders with the evil of anti-Semitism. I mean, I did an article a few years ago about the role of the Saudi lobby. The fact is, everyone knows Israel as a state. In countries such as Britain, there are organised campaigns to promote the interests of Israel and to defend it in the midst, not least, of a genocide, which public opinion is actually really overwhelmingly opposed to, according to the polls. A new poll just come out showing the large majority of the public agree with you. They want an arms embargo on Israel. So do you know that it's just disingenuous, isn't it, to say that to say what you're saying here in terms of links to the Israel lobby? What does he think Labour Friends of Israel? How do we describe Labour Friends of Israel? That's not the Israel lobby. What does he even mean? What does that mean?
Well, I think it's just when you don't want to face the facts. So you just come out with this. It's like a knee jerk. I'm just going to call them anti-Semitic because I can't answer this. And, we can read, we can use Google, we can see on the internet that you're being paid by pro-Israel groups, Israel lobby groups, to go fly over to Israel.
Because they pay for the trips, to be clear, which is payment in kind. Yeah.
And that is linked to all of these pro-Israel groups. And also, you mentioned the Saudi lobby. He's gone to Saudi Arabia, visited the Saudi Aramco oil site. So, he's compromised in that side as well. But we would talk about, the media, even the establishment to a certain degree, will admit or talk about the fact there's an oil lobby or there's an arms lobby, right? But obviously, a country's lobby on behalf of their own interests, right? And we know Israel has been doing this, and we know that they've been doing this in the UK. And I think this is just exposing the kind of the impact it has on groups within Britain who are opposing these things when these things are allowed to happen and are ignored. And so I am glad that the Guardian picked it up and is reporting on these things, and that we're having this conversation now, because we have to see what's behind the motivations to put out these policies, and to call for groups like Palestine Action to be banned. And also just to say that, we found out about this on Saturday at 8 p.m. They sent an email to Palestine Action saying, can you give us a response in the next couple of hours, late on a Saturday night? And this is the BBC, because this thing's going to come out, right? We haven't, and as far as I know, neither have other groups. We never saw the report. The press have been sent extracts from the reports. We haven't seen any of that, just the points that the press send us in order to comment and reply to. So this man is going off to the press rather than actually telling the groups who he's writing about any of the things that he's going to write about, and giving them a right to apply or comment on his supposed fact-finding mission. And when we did ask for we've asked since for the report, and we've just been told, you're not going to get it. It's going to be published next week, and that's that. So it's like there's not one bit of this is in any way, they can't even pretend it's professional. But he will defend it by saying, well, I've written 100,000 words, so you have to take me seriously.
I mean, it's really interesting talking about, well, kind of something I've often spoken about is how they're trying to turn the world on its head, cheerleaders of Israel. In that, the fact he's called an independent advisor when he's clearly someone who has passionate pro-Israel views. He was chair of Labour Friends of Israel. He's repeatedly gone on paid trips to Israel by groups which make it clear they exist to promote Israel in Western nations. And at the moment, I mean, if you look at where British public opinion is at, quite correctly, 67% of Britons, according to a poll 2 months ago, think it's likely Israel has committed war crimes, with 10% saying unlikely. A large majority demand an immediate ceasefire. There's a big lead for Britons who believe that Israel should enter peace negotiations with Hamas, a view which, if any MP spoke, could probably end their career. But it's just interesting. Public opinion is, in America, more Americans not think genocide is taking place. We haven't had a poll on that in Britain. I don't quite understand why. I've been asking pollsters for clarity in that one. Be interesting to see the results. But the point is, we have a situation where there was a state committing obviously gross crimes, some of the worst atrocities of the 21st century, that on trial at the International Court for Justice for Genocide. It's extremely likely the International Criminal Court will issue arrest warrants to Benjamin Netanyahu and other Israeli leaders. And you have here a so-called independent advisor appointed by the government after he called for people to vote for them, linked to the pro-Israel lobby, trying to demand the government then introduce legislation to ban groups taking on this genocide. It's insane.
100%. It is, and that's the thing, isn't it? His interests lie with protecting the military interests of a genocidal state whilst it's committing a genocide, and not with the will of the British people, who, as you said, support an arms embargo on Israel. And when you have a government who fails to implement one and continues to arm Israel, and not only are they, arming Israel, one of our main targets, as well as Leonardo, is Elbit Systems, which is Israel's biggest weapons manufacturer. They have several sites in this country, and they use Gaza as a laboratory for their weaponry. So even right now, during this current genocide, they're testing out new weaponry on the Palestinian people, which they'll then put onto the international market, share the intellectual property across the world of its Elbit sites, and make a killing out of what they're doing. And these factories are sending weapons right now to Israel. So when we are the ones putting our liberty on the line in order to stop these factories from operating, and whilst we accept that we understand that we are going to be criminalized, we do not for 1 second believe that we are doing anything that is either immoral or unlawful. If anything, the opposite, even if the state treats us differently. But Lord Walney, or whatever you want to call him, I don't like calling him a lord or whatever his name is today, he's just working to protect a genocide, basically, and make it harder for groups like us to do what we're doing. But that's not going to happen, because we're not going to stop. And I think that's one of the other things that keeps coming out. He says there's not enough deterrent for groups like Palestine Action or Just Oil, and that's just not true, right? Like, we have someone who's in prison right now for taking direct action. We have people facing trial. Like, there are consequences for this. It's just that people are willing to face those consequences when they're seeing the consequences that these weapons have on the Palestinian people. Just taking this, it is in terms of legally in this country, it's already, quite bad, but still we're going to take direct action. They've made a lot of effort to remove defenses and trials. So this is just like an extra thing on top of that. But I think that just shows that they realize that other things have failed. And for us, that's also encouraging, because they are going to try, people like John Woodcock and his friends are going to try and do everything in their power to stop you. But when you keep going, you get closer to victory. And for us, that's the key thing to remember, and not let them distract us. But at the same time, we have to fight back against this because it's just absolute crap.
Yeah, and on that, I mean, I'm sure John Woodcock would not like to be accused of defending a genocide, but he defends objectively a military onslaught, which we believe is genocide, in which millions of people all over the world, well, more than that, believe to be genocide. And history, I believe, will very clearly adjudicate to be a genocide. I mean, again, it's quite interesting how protesters are demonized at the time, because when people look back at protests in the past, they always side with them. So if you look back to the suffragettes, people like to think, oh, I'd be on their side. At the time, the suffragettes were really hated, demonized, portrayed as terrorists, anarchists. You read the parliamentary debates where they're laughing about, like torturing them and deporting them and killing them. And then you get, by the way, the suffragettes did far more extreme stuff than protesters today. I mean, they actually kill people and bomb things for a start. But, it's the same, LGBTQ activists, throughout history. What I think is just quite interesting, if you say to the British public, because it's so easy for the media and the establishment to demonize protests like yourself, is, do you think Israel's committing war crimes? Yes. Do you think war crimes should be stopped? Yes. Do you think if people have something within their power, if it's within their power to do something to stop war crimes, they should stop them? Yes. Well, then you have to support Palestine Action. There's no other. Yeah. It's not possible to not support Palestine Action if you believe that.
Yeah. And I think that they've, we have. I think they failed to also, I think he's failed to demonize us in a lot of ways. The interview that he did was really bad. I mean, I think his attempts to demonize Palestine Action, and also it came across, he did seem very insistent, and he just kept referring back to Palestine Action and the fact that we, as he said, smash up stuff, etc., and that he's watching his tweets and all of this. It does seem a bit obsessive. But the fact is that when these people are confronted with these vested interests that they have, they're stuttering, they don't know what to say, they're stumbled because they're not expecting to actually be confronted on these things, which I think is quite interesting. That I think he was shocked that he was even asked about that. And actually, when the story came out, it wasn't mentioned, and now it is being brought into the conversation, which I think is crucial, because we need transparency on what the real motivations are behind these things, and also like what's happening to democracy. This is an unelected politician who's received this funding from the arms industry, traveled to Israel a few months ago, and now he's coming out with this. Like, how can this even be allowed? And he gets to claim to be independent.
I mean, it is really sinister, actually, the more you look at it. I mean, he's previously called for things like, new police passed a ban protest near Parliament and MP's office. You can no longer protest against your elected representatives. It's this attempt to conflate protests with violence, scrutiny. Basically, any scrutiny, it just becomes violent. Protest exclusion zones around arms factory and fossil fuel infrastructure. Also, for example, I mean, basically arbitrary attempts, for example, force protests to pay for their own protests, it's similar to what was done to trade unions at the beginning of the 20th century, where trade unions were made financially liable for them going on strike, in an attempt to make it impossible to go on strike because it would just financially cripple them. And that is, it's things like, it's just an attempt to just abolish the right to protest. But I think, again, people have to look, I mean, he's angry about things being smashed up.
Yeah.
Has he seen what's happened? Has he seen what's happened to Gaza? Has he seen what's happened to Gaza? 70% plus of civilian infrastructure is really damaged and destroyed. It now looks a different colour and texture when looked at from space. And he's worried about some property being smashed up by companies facilitating one of the great crimes of our age. I mean, it really is. How does he think history is going to look at people like him?
I don't think he cares.
No, probably not. But just finally on this, look, what do you say? Because, Labour being run by a bunch of authoritarian weirdos, if I'm honest. They've previously criticised the government for not clamping down enough on climate protesters. So you can see where they're coming from. They've said they're not going to repeal various authoritarian bits of legislation already used to throttle protests in this country. What's the strategy now in terms of, because what will happen if the government go, we're criminalizing Palestine Action and Just Oil and all the rest as though you're terrorist organizations? I mean, that's basically, this is the sort of thing you look at, and people, if people see this happening in another country, if they saw this happening in Putin's Russia, they'd understand what this was. What do you say? What's going to happen? I mean, if you get banned, what's the strategy?
Well, one of the first things I think is that actually off the back of this, we'll probably get a lot more support and we'll probably get a lot more people joining us. And this is what tends to happen when you've singled us out during a genocide, especially to say, let's ban this group. People look at what Palestine Action is doing and go, why are they wanting to ban this group, especially when it's coming from this guy? So I think actually we're going to get a lot more support, a lot more people joining us, and ultimately we'll find a way to continue either way, and we will continue to shut down these weapons factories. I don't know how that's going to look right now, and obviously it's very early days. We don't know if a law is going to be introduced, what it will look like, etc. But what I do know is that, you know, in Palestine Action, and also some other groups as well, we have faced raids, arrests. We've been stopped by counter-terrorism police. We've had people in prison. You know, we've had very lengthy trials, defences taken away from us. So we have faced a lot of consequences, and we understand that that we need to overcome every obstacle that is thrown at us in order to be able to get closer to our victory, which is shutting Elba down and stopping these arms companies from supplying Israel. And that every time we overcome and we keep going and they fail to stop us, we're closer to winning. So ultimately, we will continue no matter what. And I have to say, this guy's given us validation. One of his first articles last week, he said, Palestine Action is causing enormous damage to the arms industry, and we will take that to our credit.
Well, I will include the link in the description if people for Palestine Action. Let's make this as counterproductive an attack as possible on you. People will be asked in years to come, no question, when Israel was committing genocide against the Palestinian people, what did you do? Did you do something or did you not? And what you've done is step up, more than step up. And history will record that. And already, you know, I've said before about protesters before, often fighting lonely battles in their time. But actually, this lot have lost public opinion. They've lost it really badly, and that's why they're lashing out. They know they've lost. They know that this is a catastrophe, and actually people are going to start asking more and more, why are these people still in public life? Look at what they defended. Look at what they were apologists for, and look how they tried to silence and intimidate and harass and destroy anyone who spoke out against this abomination. It's not going to look pretty for them. And they're right to panic, because we can't let them get away with this time. Not this time. They got away with Iraq and all the rest. They can't get away with this. This is too big a crime. And if they are allowed to get away with this, then this will keep happening. So please do share this video. Make sure the message gets out. Make sure people hear loudly about Palestine Action. Let's make this as counterproductive as possible. Defend democracy. This is about democracy, democratic freedoms. Our ancestors fought for our rights and freedoms. It's not just for us to just sit around while they get taken away from us. So I've included the link for Palestine Action in the description and when I tweet it out. Do press like, subscribe, leave a comment. Huda, thank you so much.
Thank you.